My wife was just starting grad school, and I had an interview with the School of Education. I had been to many interviews for IT positions, but this one was totally different. I walked into the office of a guy wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and he had a big ass Elvis Costello poster hanging behind him. His name was Doug Edmunds. For nearly 7 years, we bonded over being musicians, our love and fandom of Jellyfish and the Black Crows, and our sixth grade potty humor. Doug Edmunds, DB Edmunds, has released his latest solo album called Everybody Knows by Now, and it's a beautiful slab of sweet, sticky 90s power pop goodness. And I'm psyched to have Doug on Talking the Talk with Don. So, Doug, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Don, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
2024, man. Here we are. It's crazy. Like, when I heard you were putting out this album, I was so excited as always because, I always loved hearing your musical output. But it made me happy to hear this album because it really has a fire to it for some reason that I feel like maybe the last couple, like they were great, but this one has something extra to it. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but definitely feel like you put it felt a little more personal. Is that fair to say on this one?
Yeah, well, first, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I mean, I do feel like I know it's such a tired cliche to say you poured your heart and soul into something, but there was something particularly deep and meaningful about making this record. And I also made it in a very focused and concerted way. I think, being an independent musician and not having it be one's full-time endeavor, can lead to a lot of dawdling and delays and lack of focus because you're like, well, yeah, I don't have to do this now, or I'll get to it eventually, and it can take, months, if not years, to create something. And that's kind of how it was with the band that I had for like 10 years, this band called the Stars Explode. And I did 3 records over those 10 years, but kind of in fits and starts. And this one I thought, I want to make a record, like kind of the old fashioned way. I want to write a bunch of songs in a short amount of time. I want to get my band into a studio soon after we learn the material. I want to then, finish all the recording and mix it and get it out within a year. And that's basically what we did. Other than a couple songs that date back to 2021, all the material was written, last fall in just this big burst. And in some ways, I think maybe that's why it sounds a little bit more cohesive. But at the same time, I just think that I was in a really good place too, emotionally and sort of financially, and I think there's also a lot of talk among artists that, oh, you got to suffer for your art, or you got to be in a really bad way to like create good, compelling music. And I felt like this time I'm in a really good place, or I was when I started it a year ago. I still am, and so having that foundation allowed me to be all the more confident and just like, yeah, I'm going to do a record and I want it to be great. I want to really pour myself into it. And so, I think that's partly why it came together and came together so well. Now, I haven't even mentioned my amazing band. I mean, the guys in the band really came through in a big way with their individual performances and, just what they brought to the table as musicians and also just as good dudes. It's like no drama band, it's just everybody's in it for the right reasons. And so there wasn't any tension going into the studio, and there's no sort of alliances or weird backstabbing. It's just all a good bunch of guys, and we had a great time starting it off a year ago. In fact, it was a year ago this weekend that we went into Sonark Media, really beautiful facility out here near Hillsborough, North Carolina, that we started it. It was a year ago this weekend. So, and just, yeah, it just all came together. It was very focused on getting it done. I didn't want to let it drag on and on. So I'm really, really proud of it, but I'm glad you're hearing that coming through.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and for someone who loves music, obviously like you do, getting to do what I do, I absolutely love it because I get to kind of come at this as a fan of music and as a fan of artists, but then I get to kind of decipher it and kind of break it down so that I can have these kinds of conversations. And so you're
Yeah,
listening differently, I think, than you would normally listen if you weren't. But
sure.
the songs definitely just kind of struck me at times as almost being kind of autobiographical more so than before.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always tend to write about, my own experiences, and sometimes I'll just make up, completely fictional characters. Like,
Mhm.
a good example is that song, Gin and Vermouth.
Yes.
That I came up with that set of chords and sort of that guitar riff, and the first two lines, she said she was a scientist who followed Jesus Christ. That just like started me off. And that's a totally made up character. It's nobody that I know. That's an example of like more of like an Elvis Costello approach where it's like a completely fictional character, but sounds, you get drawn in by like, who is this person? Who's this character in this song? But then there's things like, Chasing Yesterday, which I think is a really key song for me. I mean, it's kind of the big, epic, serious number. I'm really fond of that song, and I think it's one of my best songs. And strangely enough, that is one of the two tracks that I wrote back in 2021.
Okay.
And in fact, I wrote that on the evening of January 5th, 2021, the night before the infamous, uprising, insurrection, whatever you choose to call it.
The biggest temper tantrum ever.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had been through what, 9 months of COVID at that point,
Mhm.
and like everybody else, I was feeling a little stir crazy. I was locked down. I was going through a really rough relationship at the time that was sort of imploding, and the walls keep closing in, the air is getting thin in here. Um, I've been losing sleep. I've been cataloging all my hopes and fears. That verse. So it goes. That song kind of travels from the them, who are all these people who have kind of lost their way and they're following this. The emperor who has no clothes. They might have lost their way chasing yesterday. And then the second verse is, I might have lost my way chasing yesterday. And
Mhm.
then the final verse is, what are we going to do to get through this mess? And it's kind of the collective we might have lost our way. And so I like the song structurally. And I think that it really resonates still with me, even though we're
Mhm.
kind of beyond that weird time.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, so that was a very personal song for sure.
To write personally and to write in that kind of autobiographical way, it's this fine line that artists can straddle, or even us as songwriters, where it's
Yeah.
like, it can either be too self-important or it could be too far out of it that you're like, it's almost like a level of denial of some sorts. So to
Yeah.
kind of keep it so close, like that's a skill, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think the songs that I write are, I think everybody in some sense that's a songwriter wants their songs to be sort of universally heard. Um, and I'm never writing for any particular audience. And certainly when I was writing that song, it was at a time when I didn't have a band and I hadn't even started working on my solo project yet. Or I had, and then it got, you know, diverted or it got put on hold because of COVID. So
Mhm.
um, at the time, I was just sort of writing what came to me with no intentions necessarily about when it would come out or whether I'd even release it. And I actually rediscovered that song by going back through my videos on my phone because during COVID, I would record these little, selfie kind of videos. If I'd
Yeah.
write something that I thought was halfway decent, I would make a recording of it so that I could remember the weird chords and the voicings and whatever. Um, and so that one popped back out at me last fall. And I was like, dang, that's actually a pretty good song. And it just continued to grow on me. And as we developed it with a full arrangement in the band, um, it really came to life, I thought.
So when you have a song like that, a song idea where you go back through, and let's say it's something like this one, right? Where you go back through, you listen to it, you're like, okay, that's a good song.
Yeah.
Like, at what point do you have to remove yourself from the equation? This is for you in general. Like, at what point do you have to remove yourself from the equation when looking at a song and going, maybe I'm not the best person to ask whether this is a good song or not. So maybe I should let someone like the band or other. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think sometimes I don't know if I really think consciously about removing myself to get an objective opinion, but I think I can tell I'm confident enough in my own songwriting after all these years to know like when it's sort of like, well, this one's a bit of a clunker and like maybe it's not worth working on, or I get excited like something's happening here. And oftentimes it's just you're channeling some other. I mean, I know all songwriters say this, and it sounds again like kind of a trite thing, but some songs just drop out of the sky into your lap, and some you got to really work on. That one kind of, evolved pretty quickly. I remember I wrote it all in one sitting, and both the lyrics and the, melody and the chords. Um, so sometimes I just kind of get a tingly feeling like, wow, this is a good tune. This is a keeper. Um, and again, with that one, I kind of put it on the shelf for a few years, but before going back to it, or a couple years, I guess. But then others, like um, Give It All You Got. That was the result of buying a new guitar. I bought a Rickenbacker, and it wrote two songs for me, or maybe even three. And it's like I pick it up as soon as I got home, and I came up with those opening chords, and they were in a different rhythm though. Originally, I remember. I was like, oh, this is a cool chord pattern, but I don't know if this rhythm works. And then it evolved into what it is. And Give It All You Got, I also am fond of. I love how the chorus just kind of swells, and it's got a positive vibe. Good way to start off the record.
That's such a good, strong song to kick off the album too, which I thought was the sequencing of albums is something I'm always, as a writer and as a interviewer and stuff, like when I have to listen to albums, like I've over the years I've realized and learned the importance of sequencing. It's an art. Like how so for this album, which by the way, and I'm not even just saying this because you're my buddy, because if you were my buddy and I didn't like it, I wouldn't talk to you about it. But anyway, but when I was listening to the album, one of the first things I was like, this is a perfectly sequenced album. But I also know the amount of time it takes me to sequence an album. So like tell me about that process for you.
Well, it's funny. I'm glad to hear you say that because honestly, when I went in to master it, um, we didn't know what the sequence was. I mean, it was just me. The band didn't come to the mastering session, but I've been working with a guy named Brent Lambert at Kitchen Mastering for the last 30 odd years. I mean, he did Gladhands' second album. That's when I first met him, like 1996, believe it or not. So it's like, a long time back. And I have a great working relationship with him. He loves the stuff that I tend to do and write, and he doesn't get to master a lot of it because there just aren't a lot of people doing this kind of music. But he sat down and we start queuing up all the tracks. He's like, "Well, do you know what order they're in?" Because I usually like to just do the order first and then just go through them, just churn through them. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't have a sequence yet. And it really kind of just fell into place. Like I knew I wanted Give It All You Got to be the opener. And Can You Feel It, the second song, is kind of, everybody thought that was like the hit or like it's so catchy. I was a little bit more reluctant about it and still am in some ways because it's sort of the obvious power pop, in air quotes. And I hate that term, and I've gotten pigeonholed into that genre, which is like a genre that just you die if you're a power pop artist because everybody just dismisses it as candy or whatever. But I think it's a really upbeat, lively song, and it's just got a really great hook and memorable chorus. So we figured, okay, that one makes sense as the second song. And then we immediately downshifted into Chasing Yesterday, which again is so heavy and kind of much deeper in some ways. And then it just kind of everything kind of fell in place from there. The only thing I second guessed a little bit was I had that acoustic number that I had done alone in the studio on the first take. I did that acoustic song called At the Break of Day. And I just thought it was a really pretty open G song. I wrote it on the couch one day and I thought, oh, tuck this one away as possible, like instrumental interlude kind of thing. And when we got to Sonark, when we got to the big studio last December, I thought about writing a melody and some words, and I was like, no, you know what? It's going to be like those Big Star records or the records back in the 60s and 70s that would have like that little interlude, like a 2 minute song that kind of got you to the next song. And so we put that at the, I mean, on the CD, it doesn't, you don't know it, but it's sort of like the beginning of side two. And so, it feels like, you're starting over, and it's like this breath of fresh air. And yeah, and so I'm glad to hear you say that you noticed the sequencing because I do think it flows pretty well.
The sequencing can really make or break an album too, because I've actually listened to quite, I've listened to a ton of albums, of varying degrees of quality.
Sure.
And you'd be surprised how many albums I've heard though that like right out the gate, I'm like, man, I don't know. But then you get 3 songs deep and you're like, they should have put this as the first song. Like I would have been
Yeah.
hooked. This sounds more like a third, fourth track, And so that's
Yeah.
always such a hard thing to do because you can't just come at it from your own perspective. Like, oh, this is what
Oh
I would
yeah.
like. You got, okay, so if I'm listening to this and I don't know this guy, like, what would I be drawn to first? And that's what I got
Yeah.
out of the sequencing of this one because I thought it
I,
was so thought out well.
well, thank you, because that is an area where I do feel like I lose all objectivity, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
asked about as far as like writing individual songs or kind of picking the songs and knowing whether they're good or whether they're worthy. I think I have more trouble thinking about, okay, what order should this flow in? And so I was lucky that Brent, I trust him. I trust his opinion. He masters a lot of records. He's done records for the Avett Brothers and all kinds of like major label artists, and he works on a lot of different genres of music, but he's just got a good instinct. And when we got through all the tracks that day and then kind of played the little bit of each one, because you're listening for consistency of levels and stuff and putting on that final layer of icing on the cake. He was like, I like this order. I think it's good. And I was like, cool, let's go with it. Let's not second guess it.
The other thing too is I guess now that we're kind of in this resurging era of vinyl, it's kind of a new thing to once again be thinking in terms of side A and side B because it used to just be one long fucking thing,
I know, I
and
know.
like it's so cool that but that you have to think about that now that you have to be like, okay, like, ooh, so what sounds like it would open side two?
Yep. I mean, that's the thing about me. I'm so old school. I'm like you, I have
Yeah.
tons of vinyl. I still listen to most of my music on vinyl. I mean, I'll stream it and find new things on Spotify or whatever other platform.
Hmm.
I'm not one of these people that's anti-streaming, but
Yeah.
um, that's a whole other conversation for another day. But having said that, I mean, I've always thought about things as far as an album, like it's a collection of songs. It's meant to be played start to finish. I do hate the fact that for many years and even today, even though, like you said, vinyl has made a resurgence, I think a lot of people don't listen to whole records, at least people of younger generations. But for me, the sequencing matters because it's not just cherry pick. It's not like, I mean, my kids have said, "Oh, I've never listened to like a whole album, Dad," and it just breaks my heart. It's like they're in their early 20s, and that's no longer true for my son because he's really gotten into vinyl in the last couple of years. So it's kind of been cool bonding with him over that because I think it is a different kind of listening experience, right? But like you said, bad sequencing can kind of make or break a record. Um, and so, yeah, it definitely matters to me. I've always thought about it in terms of side A and side B.
It's so cool to think that we actually still have that experience again as artists ourselves because even probably when we were starting out, like vinyl was on its way out by the
Yes.
time we were like in this formidable stage of being in bands.
Yep.
So the idea that you could even put a record out is like fucking exciting to me.
I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's like the first one I did in the modern sort of last, not modern era, but I guess the first thing I did on vinyl after many years of not doing vinyl was in 2017. And that was like, wow, I'm making a record. It felt so exciting. And I did a gatefold just like I did on the new one. I mean, it's like, yeah, it costs more money, but it just looks cool. And it's something, you hold in your hands and you're just like, I'm like a little kid again when I open it up and I look at it. It's not like, oh, this is me and this is so cool that it's me. It's just more like this is a record and I helped make it, and it's exciting.
Yeah, that's something again we don't ever get to think about like when we were kids. Like all I just remembered is looking at my records and going, God, it'd be awesome to have one of these one day. And like now we can, which
Yeah.
it just costs a lot to do.
It does. I mean, it does. It's definitely not the most cost-effective approach to making or breaking your career, but I'm blessed with the fact that, I'm in a place now where I can afford it, and I wasn't always in this place, so it's like I self-fund everything. I didn't do like a Kickstarter, nothing against that because I have done that in the past, and I think it's awesome to crowdsource and have your fans support you. And I did that in 2012, and that was just to make a CD, but with the Stars
Right.
Explode. And I was so grateful for the support we got, and it helped us manufacture and do some promotion and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm just a vinyl junkie. I'll always be a vinyl guy, and I think it's been really fun to work with. I call it my creative team. I know it sounds kind of pretentious, but it's like I've had the same photographer for 30 freaking years. I've had the same graphic artist and designer for over 30 years,
Hmm.
and he's a high school friend of mine, the guy that did the artwork on the cover, and then
Hmm.
the guy who shot the photograph on the back and the interiors, is a local guy named Mike Benson, wonderful photographer, has done stuff for Rolling Stone and done a lot of big jobs, but he's just this local guy that I've known for many years. He's a great entrepreneur and restaurateur, but
Hmm.
he's really first and foremost, in my mind, a photographer. And to be able to, reach out to those same people that I've been working with for all these years and say, hey, man, got a new record, need a new photo shoot, or reach out to Steven in Seattle and say, hey, new album. And he's like, oh, thank God, I'm so sick of the stuff I'm doing for work that I want to do something creative. And and then he worked on the video. I'm really excited. We probably can't even get into that much, but it's not out yet. But the video for Can You Feel It is just finished as of this past week, and really cool. That should be premiering, I think, in January. We're trying to do one of those exclusive online premieres with some music outlet, so we'll see how that pans out. Um, but yeah, just the creativity involved and not just the musical part of it, but all the steps along the way. I've always just been into the recording process. And as much as I love home recording, and I did part of the record right here at home, I like studios. I'm just, I love being in that environment. And so from the first day of going in, where you're laying down the initial tracks, to then the mixing, which, I don't know if you're going to ask me about that, but I mean, it was just an incredible honor and a privilege and a joy to work with Mitch Easter on this record.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. There's a sense of jealousy there. Like, how did you make that happen?
He's an old friend, actually. I mean, he's somebody that I've worked with in the past. I did a record with him back in 2012 with The Stars Explode. We actually recorded the beds. We did most of the recording there at the Fidelatorium, which is Mitch's studio over near Winston-Salem. It's in a little town called Kernersville. And it's just, again, full circle. It's like the producer that I worked with back in the 90s when I was in Gladhands, his name is Wes Lachaux, and he's since then become a pretty much world-renowned studio designer. He's self-taught. He's not a trained architect, but he designs studios now. And the Fidelatorium was the very first recording studio project that he did, start to finish. And so, Mitch's studio was designed by a guy that I'd been working with since the 90s. Mitch is somebody who I've admired as a kid since I was 15 or 14 years old when he did the REM albums, and I was a huge fan of his own band, Let's Active. So working with him back in 2012 was kind of a pinch me moment, right? Um, and I mean, at the time, the drummer in my band was freaking Will Rigby, the guy from the DBs, who is a contemporary of Mitch's. And so it was like, it was all kind of surreal going there and recording with him. And then, fast forward to 12 years later or whatever, and here we are. And I wasn't sure. He's kind of semi-retired, like he's not doing a lot of jobs anymore. I mean, he does, but he doesn't. And so he's not behind the desk as much, put it that way. Like he'll take jobs from friends and he'll do certain remixes for people and whatnot. And I reached out, and he wrote me right back and was like, I'd love to do your record. And I was so flattered, that he wanted to work with me. And he and I became really good friends during the process. I thought I'd go out there the first weekend of mixing and just, stay for the weekend. And once he got started, kind of let him run with it because I totally would have trusted him. But the honest truth is that we were just having so much fun and just geeking out about music. I mean, he's a total music head like you and I, and a wealth of knowledge, tons of great stories, but not like not in a name droppy kind of way, just in a very Southern gentleman kind of way. He's like the real deal. He's just this very unpretentious, humble, but very funny and smart guy who knows what he's doing. And I love his craft. I love his choices. He would like put a certain 1960s, literally like a piece of 1960s gear, like some old compressor that he had bought from, Abbey Road or something. I mean, he's just got incredible outboard gear, doesn't use it. And he asked me at the start, he's like, do you mind if I mix through the desk? I don't want to do it in the box. I don't want to do all the mixing in Pro Tools. And I said, absolutely. I mean, that's part of why I'm coming to you. So we mixed it through his Amec desk. And I
Wow.
mean, it was all patched. He's patching into all the outboard gear. And then we brought it into Pro Tools. And it was such a pleasurable experience going over there that first weekend that I ended up taking a lot of time off of work and going back like every week for about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And he and I, now I count him as a good friend. And his wife Tammy's a lovely person, and she bonded with my partner Melissa because they're both awesome. And so now we're like friends as couples. In fact, we're going out to dinner with them tomorrow night.
It's fantastic.
Pre-holiday celebration and celebrate some of these good reviews that people are given to the record. And yeah, so it's just been a great experience working with him for sure.
So when we met back in like 2002, when I first started working with you,
Yeah,
um, I was told about your band, the Gladhands, and immediately was a fan, obviously, because you and I bonded over Jellyfish and
yeah,
bands of the sorts. And, you guys, that was like not all artists or bands or musicians have their I was almost there moments.
right.
And like Glad Hands was like you're almost there thing. And it
Yeah.
was the perfect music for the time and the area and the era. Like what happened?
Man, that's a funny. Well, it's funny you asked because my old A&R guy, Dean Brownrout is his name. He signed us to Big Deal in '95,
Mhm.
and by 1999, the label, like so many other little indie labels, was imploding and going out of business. We didn't even know it at the time when we were trying to put out our third record with them. And it's basically just a typical industry story. We got signed, they were a startup label. They got bought by a bigger label conglomerate and had some money for a while. So we had a budget, to record. We had a video budget. We squeezed money out of them for touring. So we had a modest touring budget. And, our second album for Big Deal was called La Di Da. It got reviewed in Billboard magazine spotlight review right in between James Taylor and the Foo Fighters. And everybody just at the label and our publicist, and of course we in the band just freaked out because we're like, holy crap, how did that happen? Like we were nobodies. But this reviewer just really loved the record. And so he gave it a stellar review. And the next day, like they were doing sound scan and they were like tracking the sales. And they said, we think every A&R guy in LA and New York just picked up the record because, there are all kinds of sales on both coasts. And we're getting all kinds of phone calls. But I think despite what you just said, I mean, perfect music for the time, there were bands like Jellyfish, there were bands like Fastball, there were artists like Matthew Sweet, who Fountains of Wayne, there was like this
Ben
genre at the
Folds.
time. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were groups that were actually doing well and were like post grunge. The Posies was another one who like they came out of that grunge scene in Seattle. They were loud. They played guitars in a forceful way, but they were pop. And we always felt a real affinity for Jellyfish for their really beautiful orchestrations and harmonies, and then bands like Posies who were doing tough but really melodic rock, guitar-based rock. And Fountains of Wayne were just super catchy and clever. but we're getting played on the radio. And so we thought we were really close to that brass ring, you know. And after that review came out, we thought, well, here we go. We might get picked up by a major label, you know, and then who knows what's going to happen. Well, it just didn't happen. And so in '98, when we went in to record the next album with that guy I mentioned, Wes Show, our producer at the time, you know, we delivered the album, and little did we know that by that time, the our record label was already like practically going under, and they didn't tell us. We didn't know, and so it
Now,
was
was this
like,
the Wow and Flutter album?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
Wow
Yeah.
and Flutter. And so it was like, okay, so when's the record coming out, guys? We were hoping to get it out by March, and they actually set a street date, and I think it was like, March 25th or something, 1999. We're talking years
Mhm.
ago, and and then you know they stopped taking our phone calls. You'll love this. I don't know if you remember this, Don, at the time, but I invented an alter ego named Steve Chance.
I do remember Steve Chance. Oh my God.
Steve Chance.
I have not thought about that in years, but the minute I heard it, I knew
Because
what
I
it
think you were
was.
still working there. We
I
were working
was.
together. And I would use my lunch break to make fucking phone calls to book the band and or to call the record label in New York. And I was like so tired of them giving me the runaround that I started calling saying, yeah, this is Steve Chance. I'm working with Gladhands now. We're wondering when the hell the record's coming out.
I actually stole that idea from you like 2 albums ago from well, for the second album for my band at the time, Collins
Oh my
Drive,
God.
was that I realized how lame it was, like sending all these emails from my own email
Yes.
account and whatnot. So Butch Ziegler,
Oh, that's awesome. Butch Ziegler.
Butch Ziegler.
Is he who you're working with?
That's my PR guy, you know,
Yep,
and Butch didn't take any bullshit, you know, and so
exactly.
when you got an email from Butch, yeah, you still got no replies, but it still looks better than getting from me. But yeah, yeah.
That's the beauty of it. It's like you can act a lot more forceful and you know, you can just be a dick and but also be kind of a business bruiser. You know, if you're not yourself and you're not like, "Hi, I'm calling up to get my band a gig. Do you have a Thursday night in March?" You know, it's
Hmm.
like I would call, I'd be cocky, I'd be like, "Look, I represent Gladhands, they're on Big Deal, they've got reviews and guitar player, blah blah blah," and I just spew all this stuff,
Hmm.
which would have been harder to do as me, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was at the time trying to advocate for the band because we didn't have management. I mean, I was basically managing the band and booking the band. And so I was getting frustrated with all the responsibilities that I had in addition to just trying to be, you know, the singing drummer and one half of the songwriting team.
Hmm.
And so ultimately what happened was the record just never came out in America and the American record label basically went under. But it happened, you know, so sort of suddenly and without any warnings that we sort of had the air kicked out, you know, just the wind knocked out of us. So it only took 2 years for all that to happen, like the heights of getting these great reviews and feeling like we were on this upward trajectory, and then kind of, you know, tapered off. And we're like, well, we got to make another record. We renegotiated the deal with Big Deal, and we went back into the studio. And then, like by the following year, it just all fell apart.
But looking back on it now, like those are 3 incredible albums. Like
Oh, thanks,
to go
man.
back and look at that, the fact that there was like some sort of a legacy that you created, and in Japan they even made a greatest hits album, because I remember when I looked at you were so excited because it was Once Upon a Song, the best of
Yes,
the Glad Hands. Like, not
yes.
everyone can say that not only were they big in Japan, but somebody in Japan made a greatest hits album.
That was quite flattering. Yeah, that came a few years later. Like it was crazy because this guy contacted me and he had his own record label and he said, you know, you guys are kind of popular over here amongst the subset of music nerds and people really dig your stuff. And, you know, would you be willing to put together a greatest hits. And, at the time, it's like Big Deal was no longer around, and, no one was, we weren't under threat of getting sued or anything, but like many bands back then and even today, we didn't have the rights to our masters really, but
Mhm.
we had the masters. We had either the DAT tapes or the half inch master tapes, and so we just said fuck it, let's do it. And yeah, I love the fact that there's a Gladhands best of that came out in Japan only. It's a fun thing to have to, like, oh yeah, that's right, we have a best of that came out in Japan.
That is, and the funny thing is, because I was going to ask you about this earlier too, is that with the whole, again, with the vinyl uprising, will we ever get to see a Glad Hands vinyl release, or is that a little hokey?
No, man, it's funny again that you ask, because so 1997 was the year we put out La Di Da. That was
Hmm.
an album that got most of the attention, and 2027 is just around the corner, brother. So
Yeah.
I am already starting to make plans in my mind of a vinyl pressing of La Di Da, maybe with some bonus tracks, and really doing that record upright, for the first time ever, putting it out on vinyl.
Reunion tour, like,
That's going to be tricky. I have not been in touch with the guitar player, Jeff
Jeff
Carlson, in
Carlson.
almost over 10 years.
Mm.
Not because we had a falling out, but because the guy has just vanished. He won't return emails, doesn't return calls. And I know other people that, are like, can you get in touch with Jeff? Our producer, Wes, who was got to be quite close with him, has had trouble. And so, yeah, it's just wild. But he's just become this hermit in Omaha. He moved back to
Mm.
Omaha, Nebraska, and we did a reunion in 2010,
I
and we
remember,
played one
yeah.
show down in Charlotte, but and it was like an ill-fated, badly planned event, so that kind of just left a bad taste
Was
in
that
our
like
mouth.
the Charlotte Pop Festival or something,
Yeah, I think
something
yeah, I
along
think
the
it
lines of that?
might
Yeah.
have been called Charlotte Pop Fest. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
yeah, and it was just kind of a hot mess, to be honest. But I mean, it was like the Smithereens. He somehow, this guy, talk about funny monikers. His name was James Deem, not James Dean, and he organized it, and somehow he put up the money, and he brought in the Smithereens, he brought in maybe the Posies played that too, but maybe it was just Ken Stringfellow and John Hour, the two lead guys. And then, they're an old, not as well known, but there's a band called the Sponge Tones from Charlotte that was like a big band back in the 80s, around the time of the DBs, early REM. He got them to play. I'm thinking there was one other big act, but I can't recall who it was. In any case, we at our hotel in the lobby, the day that we were leaving, the Jim Babiak, is that his name? The guitar player for the Smithereens, and Pat Denizio, who was still living at the time, obviously, he they were in the lobby, and they're like, "Oh, so did you guys play at this thing?" And we're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we played, last night." And they're like, "How is it?" And I could tell that they were already a little suspect of the whole enterprise.
When they're asking one of the smallest, like, tell us about it, you're like,
Yeah, it's
you might
like,
want to sit down.
yeah, exactly. So I said, yeah, about that. We were kind of honest, but we didn't want to sour them on the whole thing. And so we're like, well, it's kind of in an out of the way place, and it's like the attendance wasn't great, but I think we left it at that. And I think I went back that night before driving back from Charlotte, and I walked into the lobby. It was at this. They ended up having it at like a university building, like Memorial Hall at UNC, like
Yeah,
a hall on the campus of Queens College or Queens University in Charlotte.
yeah.
It's not near the downtown. It was off the beaten track. There were no amenities. There was no food truck. There was no like refreshments, no nothing. You couldn't buy a beer. It was so weird, man. And and I just remember walking in and looking at the Smithereens up there on stage playing, and there were like 30 people in the audience, and I was like, this is just too depressing.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
But you know what? You earn your stripes that way, man.
yeah,
Like even after all these years, it's
yeah,
but so like after in 2024,
yeah.
You know, I mean, and you look great for 65, by the way, like incredible. Anyway, but no, but like all these years later, though, like you know, like I know the answer from my perspective, but from your perspective, what keeps this? What keeps you coming back to it? And if you're like me, do you ever just lay in bed and go, God, I want to quit you, but you're so good, I can't. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know,
I mean,
it's
yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because, depending on what day you ask me, I have those same thoughts. It's like, why am I putting so much effort into this thing where you feel like you're spitting into the wind or, whatever. It's just like there's so much music out there right now. It's so hard to get noticed. I mean, don't get me wrong. I may sound cocky or overconfident in saying this, but like I really believe in the stuff that I put out, and I try not to put out anything that I would want to listen to or wouldn't want other people to listen to. And I'm really proud of this record. Like more excited. I was more excited about this record than probably any record I've ever made. And I really want people to hear it. I still want people to hear it. And I've been encouraged by some of the early reviews, and there've been, some press coverage. And this time I hired a college radio promotion firm out in Los Angeles that got recommended to me. Planetary Group has been working radio. And so, but you gotta put money into it just to get a little bit back out of it. And, I wish that I were getting played on KEXP in Seattle. I wish that, KCRW in Santa Monica, big core NPR stations were, spinning my records. I've gotten some play on some, bigger college stations, but it's just hard to get heard. And so I think what motivates me is just the doing it, is just seeing it through from like being on my couch with an acoustic guitar in the middle of October last year, and now some of those songs are like on this record, which looks and sounds really cool. And so just like believing in that process and doing it partly just to do it, partly for that process. I'm way past the point of caring about being famous. I'm way past the point of caring about trying to make any money off of it or getting chicks or getting, attention. It's just like all those cliches of being in a band and being a rock star. It's like I do it because I love it and because I have to,
all three of those boats have long sailed, man.
Yeah.
Nina Pinta, Santa Maria, gone. You know, like there's no money in this. There's no girls in it. I mean, we've got our girls already, which is
Exactly.
incredible.
Yeah.
But, and I love to hear that because I feel like it's the same thing as that basically from what I understand you're saying, if I'm correct, is that your idea of success completely changes when you're doing this in
Yeah.
your quote unquote later years where like
Yeah.
you've fallen down, you scraped the knee, you've dirtied your jeans up, and now you're just kind of like, but I still like doing it. It's fun.
It's exactly right, and I just think I couldn't not do it. I think if I stopped doing it entirely, that I'd become miserable pretty quickly. And I've also invested a lot of money in just buying gear, and I'm not one of those like I don't know if you've ever heard the term blues lawyer. It's like dudes that make six figures easy and buy $4,000 guitars just so they can hang them on their wall, but they play them like three times a year. Like I have a lot of musical instruments around me. I like touching them. I like playing them. And generally, when I sit down and apply myself as often, more often, less often than I wish, but when I do it, songs come out of it, and it just like sometimes they're organic. Sometimes I have to work at them a little more, but I just think that, it's that doing it. It's just like playing tennis. Like some people are into going out and playing golf or playing tennis or playing pickleball or whatever. Like I'm not into sports. I'm not a sports guy. So what I do is music,
Another thing we bonded over, like, which is so funny because people would always, I would wear literally wore my School of Ed shirt until it fell off of me, because,
Nice.
and I'd go someplace, they'd be like Tar Heels. I'd be like, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, this? No, I worked at
Worked
UNC
there.
in
Yeah.
Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I could care less about the, yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, Tar Heels. Yeah, cool.
Right.
If they'll keep you from talking to me anymore, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But
That's so funny.
Well, Doug, dude, thank you so much for doing this and taking the time to talk. It's
Oh
fun to
yeah,
talk
man.
to friends in a way like this to, you know, hear about the music, hear about the process, but to also kind of bond and get inspired myself. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, right on. It's been a pleasure. I mean, I was looking forward to this all week, and I'm glad we had some time to do it. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm for the record and for the nice review that you just put out. And it was a blast catching up, man.
DB Edmunds, man, everybody knows by now. So if you had to send people out with one song off this album, what would it be?
Oh man, that's tricky. I have my favorites for sure, but I'd probably say it kind of became a grower for me, but that opening track, Give It All You Got, I mean, that's kind of a nice, it gives you a sense of what the whole record sounds like, and I think it's a great song to sort of kick off the record, but that'd probably be a good one to take us out as well.
Well, all right. Well, then I'm gonna let it take us out, dude. Thanks again for doing this, Doug.
All right, Don, thanks a million, man. Take care.